So yeah, my name is James Ilse. I am a senior solutions engineer at Solo.io. I've been there for about a year and a half. Prior to that, I was a staff SRE at Quizlet. Been in DevOps work for about a decade. I've put Istio in production at Quizlet. I've done the VM to Kubernetes dance, which I'll never do again. I'm doing, again, big companies, Bank of America, NASA, small startups. I've done it all. Prior to that, I was a developer, like a strict developer, in really old languages like Cold Fusion that no one ever wants to touch again. I'm telling you all this because I've got a good long career behind me, so I have some good perspective on service mesh. I've been doing it for about 4 years. Do I have a bias? Absolutely. I work for a company called Solo. They have 4 out of 6 TOC members on Istio, so I have a strong Istio bias. That being said, I'm not here to sell you anything. If you want to talk about what we do, we can come talk to us. But so what problems does a service mesh even solve, right? We kind of consider this last mile problem. Most folks have kind of figured out Kubernetes, which does your orchestration, or Terraform for provisioning. And Backstage has gotten real prevalent, which means more and more people figuring out how to do the developer experience. But you get in a state where you have a bunch of microservices and you have multiple clusters. You need to know what the services are doing if you're an SRE. Otherwise, you get into outages you can't fix. You need to be able to secure that traffic using MTLS or some plan of something. You can't just let it be open. And you really need to be able to observe it well. And the more and more you can move that into a layer that doesn't involve your application, the less and less you got to bother developers about anything, or the less they kind of shoot you in the foot by setting retry logic that DDoSes you, which I've seen at my company and places others. So there's kind of 3 service meshes that are left standing. There's Linkerd, Cilium Service Mesh, and Istio, and that got cut off because we have different fonts. But anyway, they're all CNCF graduated products. They're both been around for a while. Cilium's the newest, been in beta for about 2 years, or it was in beta about 2 years ago. There's still some on the fringes. Console Mesh still exists. Anthos still exists. AWS has their own one. There's cloud provided ones, but they're a small market share. And some of those I think are probably not going to last more than a year. So mainly I'm going to kind of focus on these. The first one is Linkerd. Linkerd is the oldest. It's been around, I think, about 7 years. First CNCF graduated product. It uses a sidecar model, which Istio does as well. It's very performant, great community, a very, very mature product, a good choice. However, it does have some cons. It is a single vendor open source. And if you've been paying attention to single vendor open source in the last year, you realize the problem there. Buoyant owns all of Linkerd. That means they can change the distribution model, which they did, which charges their users more money. And they can do that again if they want, which kind of makes it a dangerous proposition. And they also lock up some of the better stuff behind premium features. Then there's Cilium Service Mesh, which doesn't run a sidecar, tightly coupled to the Cilium CNI, which if you're going to pick a CNI right now, go pick Cilium. It's easily the best. Like, it is really, really great. I'm not going to throw any shade there. It's fantastic. And that aspect works really well with this. However, Isovalent got bought by Cisco, and no one knows what's going to happen with them the next year. Also a single vendor open source. Isovalent pretty much runs all the contributors. Very low adoption. It really hasn't gotten that much legs, but many of them, I've only talked to one company that's even considered it. Now there's Istio. Again, I have a bias here, but greatest number of production installs, most features, been around for a good while. Used to be really, really complicated, gotten a lot easier, still somewhat more complicated than the other two, in my opinion. Not single vendor open source. Google contributes, Solo, Red Hat, IBM / Red Hat, whatever you want to call it, a bunch of other companies. Still running sidecars, which are sometimes harder to tune. Still more complex, again, than the others. A bit of a steep learning curve. However, that's kind of changed. If you track KubeCon EU, there's something called ambient mode that went into beta. We'll probably go GA this year. That is a different way of running Istio. You can just drop and replace your current sidecar Istio with this. Does not run a sidecar, lower CPU costs, especially if you're doing a lot of L4 traffic. Really makes a lot of things a lot simpler. Upgrades and conversion, all of it's much, much easier. A lot of companies contributed besides just us, but still in beta. So you can't use it just yet. Still has a bit of a learning curve as everything else does. But it is really, if you looked at Istio 2 years ago, look at it again with ambient mode, or even just a year ago, look at it again with ambient mode. So what I think will happen in this space in 2025, I think the market share is going to shrink. Kind of free money's dried up a little bit. More and more people are concentrating on a few things. So I think maybe the next year will probably just be down to Linkerd and Istio as the kind of the viable open source service mesh that you can use. Ambient mode going GA is going to make a big impact. I say this because I have customers that are running hundreds of clusters that are waiting for it because they know it'll reduce their costs. I think I know it'll be a huge deal for them, and it'll probably be a huge deal for a lot of other people because it makes Istio so much more accessible. I also think that service meshes will become more and more prevalent. It kind of already follows the adoption curve that Kubernetes does, because people get onto Kubernetes and they realize they need a service mesh after they have 2 or 3 clusters. So I mean, I think that as Kubernetes even more mature, service mesh will become even more mature. Anyway, my name is James Ilse. If you want to talk about service mesh or anything else, please hit me up. You can find me on LinkedIn or anything else. I'm literally the only James Ilse in Northern America, so it's pretty easy to find.